do you know what we're here for? You know we're here about AG.
I don't think you know what you're here for.
Well, you the one talking about.
I think your fake eyelashes are messing up.
No,
what you're
ain't
reading.
nothing.
Hold on.
Listen.
Order.
Mr. Chairman,
That's beneath
would
even
you
you,
please
Green.
regain
That's beneath
order
even
of your
you.
committee?
Order.
I'm just curious, just to better understand your ruling. If someone on this committee then starts talking about somebody's bleach blonde, bad built butch body, that would not be engaging in personalities, correct?
A what now?
Chairman, I make a motion to strike those words.
I don't think that's
Hold on.
part
I'm
of the.
trying to find clarification on what qualifies.
Chairman, motion to
I
strike
had no
those
idea
words.
what you just said.
We're not gonna do this. Look, you guys earlier literally just
You just voted to do
Y'all did
it.
it first, so you
You
don't want to
just
talk about
voted
it.
to do it.
Order.
I'm trying to get clarification.
Look at calm down. Calm down.
No, because this
I
is
would
what
like
y'all
to get
do.
through proceedings.
So I'm trying
Hey,
to get
Miss
clarification.
Crockett, you're not
Y'all wanna
recognized.
play
Miss
games,
I can't hear
Crockett.
you with your
and you
yelling.
don't want
Calm
me to
down.
Be,
Can
no,
you please calm
don't
down?
tell me to calm down.
Calm down.
Because y'all
Please
talk
calm
noise,
down.
and then you
You're
can't
out of
take
control.
Because if
Look,
I
Chairman,
come
can we
and
send
talk
take a
about
break
her,
for 5
y'all
minutes?
gonna have a
Mr.
problem.
Chairman, Mr.
Order.
Chairman.
All right,
Sorry.
Chair.
I don't know why
Okay.
you're
Order.
acting
Chair
like
now
that.
recognizes
Not cute.
Ms. Green for 4 minutes and 21 seconds.
This is something that I just can't get over. I can't get over the gentle lady from South Carolina talking about white privilege.
Who bribed Hunter Biden to be here today? That's my first question. Second question, you are the epitome of white privilege, coming into the Oversight Committee, spitting in our face, ignoring a congressional subpoena to be deposed. What are you afraid of? You have no balls to come up here and...
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry.
Mr. Chairman,
If
The ladies recognize.
if the gentle lady
Play
wants to hear from
stupid
Hunter
games.
Biden, we can hear from him right now, Mr.
and you
Chairman.
win
Let's take a
stupid
vote
prizes.
and hear from
I'm
Hunter
speaking.
Biden. What are you
women
afraid
allowed
of?
to speak?
Hold on,
here?
hold on.
Why-
Order,
why are you
order,
guys not
order.
willing to let
Are
us
Space.
women allowed to
hearing?
speak in
All
here
right.
or no?
Okay.
Are women allowed to speak in here or no?
Order.
Could you keep interrupting me?
I'll interrupt the
You keep
chairman. I don't
interrupting.
know that he's a lady.
It was a spit in the face, at least of mine as a black woman, for you to talk about what white privilege looks like, especially from that side of the aisle. And let me quote your now ousted speaker and what he had to say about the Republican Party and y'all's lack of diversity. When you look at the Democrats, they actually look like America. When I look at my party, we look like the most restrictive country club in America. To be clear, whatever happens to your little leader, it's going to be because of the actions that he took. So you can talk all you want to about how January 6th was nonsense, but all of y'all were running at that time. Y'all were grabbing y'all's gas masks and y'all were running to your offices because you didn't know if they were coming to kill you. You should have cared that somebody was there to protect you, but instead you want to play games because you found out that it was your leader that decided that he wanted to propagate an insurrection on our country. So don't tell me that you care about the Constitution, because you don't. All you care about is Trump getting reelected, and I'll yield the last of my time to my leader.
During that time, under the guise of COVID, Congress appropriated billions, $189 billion to the ESSER fund to restore educational services after COVID-19. Of course, like everything else, the government throws taxpayer dollars at. The money was often used inappropriately. And while there were some school districts that appropriately spent the funds, there were many, and unfortunately far too many, that used it for nonsense like DEI programs, critical race theory, gender ideology, and other work programming.
I just want to be clear. I'm gonna go to the end real quick, because I know that was brought up. Critical race theory, is that typically taught K through 12, yes or no?
No.
Okay, all right, so we can stop with the nonsense, because K through 12 was not teaching critical race theory, at least in this country. I can't talk about what happens in other countries, but in our country, K through 12 is not learning critical race theory, just for those that are unfamiliar.
From day one, when Joe Biden took the oath of office, he issued an all-out assault on American energy. President Biden's war on fossil fuels doesn't cover all oil and gas. It only covers American oil and gas. And maybe that's the most perplexing part of his failed policies that angers people. And people have figured this out.
We have this thing called climate change that's taking place. And right now, especially in the state of Texas, we are losing so much of our farmland because of this thing called climate change. We just had wildfires that destroyed fires. We know that right now, when it comes to our sugar crops, we're having issues because it takes 6 years just to raise a sugar crop. So guess what? We've got to be creative. And honestly, if we would allow the Republicans to continue to decide on what we are going to do when it relates to energy, well, by gosh darn it, I think we'd still be in horse and buggy. Mr. Hamilton, I don't want you to feel left out of this conversation. So I'm going to make sure I ask you some questions. Let me know if you're having problems answering them, because they really should be yes or no. Let's see, you're the executive director for the America First Legal, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and America First Legal is a member of Project 2025, which is dedicated to creating the playbook for the next conservative administration and what it calls the Project Pillars, correct?
We are proud contributors to Project 2025.
Okay, and are you familiar with Project 2025's mandate for leadership?
In fact, I am.
Okay. And in fact, you wrote some of the sections of this mandate related to the DOJ, correct?
Sure did.
And the mandate outlines policy priorities for the next conservative president. Is that correct?
It does.
You've done a great job. I just want to let you know. All right, so let's walk through some of the provisions of the mandate. It calls for eliminating the Department of Education, eliminating the Department of Commerce, deploying the military for the use of domestic law enforcement against protesters under the Insurrection Act of 1807. It also has the repealing of Schedule F status for thousands of federal employees to allow a president to replace career civil servants with unqualified partisan loyalists. That's probably my favorite of it. It also prohibits the FBI from combating the spread of misinformation and disinformation, like Russia and China, who are actively trying to interfere with American elections. I don't know why or how anybody can support Project 2025. And I know that there was allegedly a joke about dictators and whether or not that's funny, but in the United States of America, dictatorships are never funny, and Project 2025 is giving the playbook for authoritarianism as well as the next dictator to come in. Mr. Bobulinski, I know that you take exception to the fact that your credibility has been called into question over and over, but when someone comes to testify under oath, whether it's before this committee, behind closed doors, or in person, then we have to evaluate someone's credibility. And sir, I definitely have always had issues with your credibility, as I know that you are very well aware of. So let me remind you of what happened behind closed doors.
Well, you should ask Ro Khanna about my credibility.
I haven't asked you a question, okay?
You are?
When I haven't. So when I ask you a question, that's when you answer. Otherwise, I'm talking. So.
Excuse me?
Reapportionment is going to occur in 6 years. And the idea is that you bring a couple million, 8, 10, 12 million people into this country, and you lure them with social safety net programs, you lure them with government benefits, and they go to the blue states. They go to the cities that offer wildly disproportionate social benefits to those in need. And that's what we're seeing in New York, but they're going there. And I guess when the census occurs, it's going to result in New York and California and Illinois receiving a disproportionate percent of their representation, because we do not apportion the census based off of citizens. We apportion the census based off of humans. And I mean, I think that's a big problem.
I do want to address the last things that were brought up about the census, and I'm not really sure if my colleague recognizes that Texas actually got 2 new congressional seats. The state of Texas actually grew a whopping 4 million people, and because of those 4 million people that came into Texas, or from wherever they came from, we actually got 2 new congressional seats, which Texas historically has been a red state, and New York actually lost a seat, which historically has been a blue state. So I did want to make sure we put some facts on the record. They want to talk about the Ukrainians got all of these Nazis.
It's amazing to me that just in a few years' time, it's now considered misinformation to talk about the Nazis in Ukraine.
Well, let me tell you something. You can find Nazis anywhere. You can find them right here in the United States. In fact, a bunch of the people that they're calling victims and prisoners of war, also known as convicted felons from January 6th. I have an article that I'd like to enter into the record by unanimous consent that says neo-Nazi January 6th rioter pleads guilty.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. So here's the point. We have people in this chamber that are actually causing just as much a threat, if not more of a threat, to our own country. We should be talking about holding our very own accountable for the misinformation and disinformation that they are spreading, whether it's coming out of China, whether it's coming out of Russia, or whoever is peddling it. It is a problem because right now what we see is that people are dying and we cannot get the support that we need from the public because they continue to peddle lies. And I'm tired of it because I didn't come to this chamber to play games. I came to this chamber to answer to the people, the American people, and to make sure that we keep the American people safe.
This is a ridiculous expectation, so ridiculous as to raise the suspicion that it's intended solely to render the bill unworkable and meaningless. This amendment would serve only to challenge law enforcement who are properly doing their job to stop smugglers and illegal aliens from terrorizing their communities.
If the gentleman has opposition and has an offer to define actively assisting, then that would be great. But the reality is that what's going to happen is what we've seen happen in the state of Texas, where we have a governor who has murders on his hand as far as I'm concerned, because we've had active deaths at the hands of mishandling this. If this is going to be a federal issue, then the federal government needs to be the ones that are absolutely going to be over federal law.
Pretending to take that ivermectin is dangerous or claiming that it's horse medicine, would you not agree that that's the exact definition of misinformation?
I would not agree with that. There are very well done randomized trials showing no benefit of ivermectin.
And you knew that in 2021?
I was not at the FDA.
No, you didn't know that in 2021. Has ivermectin been successfully used in medical treatments?
Successfully used for worms, but no effective treatment for
It's been administered
ivermectin.
in humans billions of times over the last, 30 years? Correct?
Again, for the treatment of worms.
Dr. Califf, let me ask this. What do you think that that tweets like this garner credibility to an organization like the FDA? Do you think that snarky tweets that I would think that my teenage daughters might write, do you think that that garners credibility with the FDA and the American people?
I can't really comment on that. And again, I wasn't at the FDA when that tweet was put out.
I don't know how long you were asked about ivermectin. And let me tell you something. I don't know if you've ever testified in court, but you will be a great witness because you refused to answer the way that he wanted you to, which would have been, again, putting out misinformation. What is so interesting about this hearing is that basically what the Republicans are arguing for is carte blanche. We should be allowing anybody to say whatever, and that's how we get so much Russian propaganda. I was able to produce some that was spread by one of my colleagues in another hearing. This is the problem. This is why China is coming after America. This is why we see the Russians coming after America, because we have people that will continue to spread their lies, and in spreading their lies, they're causing harm to Americans instead of these people in this chamber doing what they are supposed to do, which is to protect the American people and use the Constitution, because not every country has a Constitution that protects the people. And so I would like that this party stop peddling Putin's lies and focus on making sure that we can put forth truth that we can all respect and understand. And with that, I will yield.
Would you agree that debt is one of the biggest challenges facing our country?
The president believes deeply in fiscal responsibility and put forward a budget. Director Young was here in front of House Budget testifying on his approach, on the president's approach.
The federal government is going to have to do more with less. We have to get our spending under control, and we got to grow the economy to create additional tax revenue to pay our way out of the debt that we're under. And I appreciate all that you're doing to help save taxpayer dollars. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
There were some questions posed to you specifically about debt. And there seemed to be a concern about the mounting debt. And I am going out on a limb, and I am going to ask you if you are aware of how much debt we added under the Trump administration, out of curiosity. If you don't know, I know off the top of my head, but something tells me you may know.
I have an imprecise number. I
Okay.
bet you have the precise number in front of you, so I don't want to give you the imprecise number if you have the precise.
No. Give me the imprecise.
No, please.
Well, I'm going off of my head because that wasn't part of what I was supposed to say. But long story short, $8 trillion was added under the Trump administration. And so I think that it is important that we focus on making sure that we're keeping our debt under control, but I think it's also important that we're honest about how that debt is accrued and make sure that we don't continue to make the same mistakes. I know that the election was brought up, and there are those that are standing by their man, but they also seem to be concerned about debt, which seems like the two don't go together, because we know that their man actually is really good at running up the credit card debt for this country, because he likes to give tax breaks to his very rich friends, which means that we don't get as much money coming through the door when they are not required to pay their fair share. So I just wanted to make sure that we put that out there. Have you ever heard of Project 2025?
I've read about that, Congresswoman.
Okay. And there are some things indicated in Project 2025 that are quite concerning to me. And I want to talk about a few of those topics because this hearing almost feels like a Project 2025 hearing. One of those topics is diversity in the workplace. The agenda includes making sure that the next conservative administration dismantles DEI apparatus by eliminating various chief diversity officer positions, et cetera. And you engaged in an exchange earlier with one of my colleagues, and I don't know if you recall, but it was hitting me a little differently as a Black woman sitting here, because it almost seemed as if you either get diversity or you get qualifications. It did not seem as if my colleague understood that someone can be diverse and qualified. And it is why you have people like me that get very frustrated, not just in the halls of Congress, but in general in this country. Because as I'm sitting here, and there seemed to be this question of you're either diverse or you're qualified, all I could think about was the fact that I currently hold an honorary doctorate. I also hold a Juris Doctorate. I also hold a bachelor's. I also technically hold the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the Civil Air Patrol, and I actually practiced law for almost 2 decades, in addition to serving on various boards, in addition to being a prior state lawmaker. And there are those that would make some people believe that because I happen to be Black and or a woman, that somehow, even though I can rattle off all the qualifications in the world, my Blackness makes me unqualified. My question to you is that the attitude that you subscribe to?
Absolutely not, Congresswoman. And in fact, what we do at OPM every day is look to knock down barriers that are keeping qualified people like yourself, qualified people from all across America for pursuing federal jobs.
I see a lot of hypocrisy from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle today. And even worse so, the fact that they want to place an attack on democracy on Trump or Republicans is actually hysterical. Biden called Xi Jinping a smart guy, end quote. He described his relationship with Xi Jinping as a, quote, friendship. He said of the CCP, Joe Biden said directly, that they're not bad folks. He said also that it's in our own self-interest that China continues to prosper. But is it? It's not actually. It's actually unsafe for the entire world, not just the United States. The left is trying to dismantle freedom. They're trying to dismantle liberty. They are trying to dismantle the Constitution and everything our founding fathers and our nation was founded on in this country today. So I would like us to have a more honest discussion about what is actually happening in this country, what we're doing, and more importantly, not doing to combat CCP.
In addition to making sure that we can outline some of the things that it was Trump that said, I think my colleague from South Carolina may have gotten confused about who said what, but these are things that Trump has said about Xi. Smart, brilliant, everything perfect. We love each other. President Xi, who's a friend of mine, who's a very, very good man. There's nobody like that. The look, the brain, the whole thing. My feeling towards you is an incredibly warm one. This doesn't sound like someone that has any intentions of being hard on China, in my opinion.
And you raised this in your testimony, Mr. Fahey. The opportunity cost, when Alvin Bragg did the day one memo, says we are not going to charge all these felonies, we're going to bring them down to misdemeanors and let the bad guys roam the streets of New York. How that squares with what happened here, that to me is the real issue. That's the issue that most Americans see, like, we're going to do this to the former president of the United States, meanwhile, take felony charges against really bad guys on the street and bring them down to misdemeanors. That's the opportunity cost here, I believe, in Manhattan. You get the last word, Mr. Fahey.
Yeah, exactly. When you're letting carjackers out on bail or illegal immigrants that assault police officers aren't getting prosecuted, but this is the way you're using your time, in addition to the fact you run on a soft on crime policy and then you do take the most creative, aggressive approach to this crime, it's hard to argue it's anything other than a political motivation.
Okay, I got a lot of ground to cover. I do want to clarify, Mr. Fahey, when you consistently talk about NY or New York crime, you're speaking in an opinionated stance. You're not speaking from a place of fact, correct?
No, I'm speaking from a place of facts.
Okay, well, let me clarify for you. Thank you so much. I'm reclaiming my time. Let me clarify for you that NYPD puts out reports. And in April, it said overall index crime across New York City dropped another 4.9%. As it relates to May, the report says overall index crime across New York dropped another 2.4%, and June's report hasn't come out. I would ask for unanimous consent to enter this into the record. You know, there's a lot of conversation around rolling back regulations. My colleagues continuously talk about rolling back regulations and not really understanding the importance of these guardrails.
President Biden's radical agenda has pushed out massive, costly regulations.
Often we see agencies abuse the separation of powers, creating rules and laws, regulations without consent of Congress.
Grid operators around the country are sounding alarm about the potential disruptions, blackouts, brownouts due to regulations, particularly the Clean Power Plan 2.0 rule.
The EPA regulations are unsustainable for Americans, and believe me, Republicans want clean air and water too, but the climate cult has got to end.
And so I just want you to listen to a situation that technically impacted your agency. In 2018, Trump made sure that he scrapped a 2015 Obama-era rule requiring advanced braking technology on trains transporting particularly hazardous materials. That rule would have required compliance by certain trains by 2021 and others by 2023. But as Fortune reported at the time, Trump's Department of Transportation decided that the cost of installing these more sophisticated brakes outweighed the benefit. While it has been noted that technically the rule would not have required the Norfolk Southern train that derailed in Ohio to have such brakes, some believe it would have if not for Trump. Norfolk Southern estimates that it will spend more than $1 billion to address the contamination caused by the East Palestine derailment and improve rail safety and operations, which includes this settlement with the United States valued at over $310 million, as well as around $780 million in environmental. Regulations are made to protect people from potential disasters such as this. And I can pretty much probably guess that the people of East Palestine would have preferred that there would have been some protections that would have kept them from enduring that terrible situation.
Ms. Cheadle, you said that the buck stops with me, and I agree. I don't think you should resign. I think you should have been fired. Ma'am, you are a DEI horror story. I've told my daughter multiple times, my wife and my daughter, we talk to her all the time about how she's going to succeed in life. She'll succeed in life by achieving. Ma'am, you have not achieved today. You've let the American public down. If it was up to me, you'd be gone.
Let me just pick up where my colleague from Tennessee left off. Director Cheadle, was the incident on July 13th due to DEI, or rather systemic failures in communication and potentially safety protocols?
The incident on the 13th has nothing to do with DEI. The incident on the 13th has to do with a failure or a gap either in planning or communication.
Thank you so much. In fact, I have a few articles that I will enter into the record once I wrap up that actually acknowledge a number of women specifically for their valor in their service, whether it's been in various levels of law enforcement. I'm just curious, and this is yes or no. Is Trump's name ever mentioned in Project 2025? Yes or no? Just yes or no. I got you. I got you.
Within the document itself,
yes.
There are a number of references to the former administration.
So is Trump's name mentioned just one time?
I believe it's mentioned more.
Okay. 5 times.
I haven't counted.
Oh, okay. Well, if I told you that his name is mentioned approximately 312 times, would you have any reason to dispute that?
I don't have any reason.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's interesting that we want to try to pretend. We're not going to pretend in here. We're going to work with facts and not fiction.
So I have a series of questions for you, Mr. Santos, that are yes or no. And so I would ask that you use yes or no when I ask these questions. Did the U.S. Census Bureau do anything to identify the immigration or citizenship status of individuals surveyed during the 2020 census, yes or no?
No.
Are illegals counted in the census, yes or no?
Yes, if they're permanent residents, if they reside in the U.S.
Okay, so when you're doing the census with folks and asking the question, you're asking them if, you're not asking them if they're a citizen, you're asking, do you ask if they're a permanent resident?
We ask folks to list everyone who lives at that residence.
Okay, but you're saying you're only counting illegals if they're a permanent resident.
Well, if they live at that residence. It's the interpretation of the instructions.
So your definition of permanent residence is that they live at a place in the U.S., at a U.S. address.
Yes, I believe I misspoke because there's a legal definition to permanent.
Misspoke.
To permanent resident. It's someone who usually lives at that address.
So I'm going to ask the question again. Are illegal aliens, criminal illegal aliens, the people that break the law coming into our country when they enter in the door illegally, are they counted in the U.S. Census, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Are there political implications for congressional apportionment and the Electoral College when we're counting non-citizens, when we're counting illegals, criminal illegal aliens in the census, yes or no?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
Are there political implications for congressional apportionment and the Electoral College when you are counting criminal illegal aliens in the U.S. Census?
I do not know.
Oh, you absolutely know. Because apportionment is based on what? Is it based on what? Population?
Yes.
Population based on counts in the what? U.S. Census?
Correct.
All right. You're the director of the U.S. Census Bureau, correct?
Correct.
Why is this so difficult for you to answer honestly?
Well, no, it is what it is. So if there's more population, then you get.
You just said you didn't know if there were political implications for congressional apportionment and the Electoral College when you're counting illegals.
In all honesty, I am not a politician. I'm a scientist, and so we do our counts according to the Constitution.
Mr. Science.
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
When you're doing apportionment, we're doing congressional seats based on population that includes illegal aliens. Does that have a political impact in campaigns when you're drawing those lines and having people vote in those elections?
They are counted in apportionment, yes.
Okay. You're not being honest this morning, and I think it's a slap in the face to the American people.
It is interesting that we're having this hearing, and I know one thing that I have learned so far is that while freshman orientation just ended, we need a course on what the census is for, because we have people sitting in Congress and have no idea what the census is for. And so I do appreciate that you have talked about what the funding is for, but it seems like my colleagues really want to zero in on southern states. So let's talk about Texas for a second. And let's deal with them and their concerns about their districts. And let's also talk about the citizen situation. So I don't know how much you've paid attention to the election, but we do have an incoming administration, and we have a border czar who has said that they are going to deport everyone that is here and is not a citizen. They are planning to do mass deportations. In fact, in the state of Texas, our commissioner has offered up land so that they can put these camps there and send people out of our country. Now, if you start asking people, are you a citizen or not, and they're living in a home and somebody's threatening to go in and raid homes and take everybody out and send them back to wherever they came from, I mean, I would imagine that that may make people say, never mind, I'm not going to fill this out. But I mean, has that been your finding or no?
We have conducted research that shows that there can be selective inclusion of individuals who reside in a residence because of
Exactly, because you've got the federal government that is asking this question, and it's the same federal government that is threatening to go and yank people out of their schools, their homes, and things like that. And then we just had a conversation where we were talking about how many voters. Listen, when you're counting people, you're not just counting voters. You count children, don't you?
Correct.
You count a lot of people that aren't necessarily voters, and I want to make sure that we really get to the nitty-gritty on Texas, because this is hilarious to me. Texas added 2 seats. In 2020, according to the census, and we know that there was a significant undercount, specifically in Texas for a combination of reasons, but we know that specifically Texas added 4 million people. Of those 4 million people, do you want to take a guess at how many were Anglos? Just a guess.
I'd say a majority.
180,000. That's it, of 4 million. 95% of the people that were added, and we know that when it comes to minority populations, they tend to be undercounted. So get this, we added 4 million people. They were people of color. Texas got 2 new seats. So they took those black and brown and Asian bodies, and guess what? Do you think that we got a new black, brown, or Asian seat? Somehow, the way that they do their Republican math in the state of Texas, that amounted to 2 new white seats. Guess what? White Republican seats. We got 2 new Republican seats out of 4 million people of color. So let me tell you, they love to use our bodies to apportion us in an inaccurate way. All right, so when we talk about our districts, I also want to talk about something that Texas is taking advantage of that I've worked on a lot. In fact, I did legislation on. It is called prison gerrymandering. I don't know if you are familiar with it.
I'm familiar.
But here is the reality. The numbers show that in rural Texas, they were constantly bleeding population. Urban Texas was growing exponentially. But what they do is they count inmates where they are imprisoned instead of counting them where it is that they will return to. So their family members that are in Dallas, Texas, or Houston, or wherever, their family members, when they need something, they call us, even if it's relating to that inmate. But somehow rural Texas is getting better roads than they probably deserve because they're counting those inmates that are not driving on those roads. They're counting those inmates that are not using their hospitals. They're counting those inmates whose children are not attending their schools because of prison gerrymandering. So again, Republicans are really good about using black and brown bodies, because I can also tell you that the numbers are clear that we have a black and brown incarceration issue, not just in Texas, but in this country. And in fact, the state of Texas incarcerates more people than any other independent democratic country. That is how bad our incarceration is just in the state of Texas. And I've got so many great colleagues on this committee that actually benefit from being able to do things like that. So listen, this is about resources. It's about putting the resources where the people are. And I am curious to know for whoever goes next. Do you ask your constituents when they call your office, are you a citizen or not? Because at the end of the day, I have to handle immigration cases as well in my office. We are elected to represent the people regardless of their citizenship, and we have to help them because they reside in our districts. Thank you, and I'll yield.
So many of you know that I practice law, but some of you don't realize that I actually was a business major out of Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee. And the emphasis that I got in my business degree was on finance. And as I traveled the country campaigning this election cycle, one of the things that I talked about was this idea that in finance, we always promote this idea of diversity. If you know anything about a portfolio, the one thing that you want to do is make sure that it's as diverse as possible, because at times certain stocks will perform better than others, and they will exemplify various strengths and weaknesses, and together a diverse portfolio is usually what any good finance person would promote. They wouldn't promote that you solely invest in vanilla wafers, believing that that is going to be the strongest portfolio, but instead they may want to add some chocolate cake and some Twinkies into the mix to make sure that we have the best portfolio, because there will be different preferences by different people, and again, there will be different strengths. But as I sit here and I think about what we say and what I'm hearing as it relates to diversity when it comes to anything outside of making money, and to be clear, we are losing GDP every time we try to push back on this idea of diversity, because all of us bring something different to the table. But you consistently said over and over the word oppression, and every time that you said it, it was almost as if I was hearing nails on a chalkboard, because it seems like you don't understand the definition of oppression, and I'd ask you to just refer to Google to help you out. Oppression is the prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment or control. That is the definition of oppression. And so as I sit here as a Black woman who practiced civil rights, let me tell you, the reason that my colleagues wanted to make sure you understood the same Black history that your side of the aisle wants to delete out of classrooms is because you can then misuse words like oppression. There has been no oppression for the white man in this country. You tell me which white men were dragged out of their homes. You tell me which one of them got dragged all the way across an ocean and told that you are going to go and work. We are going to steal your wives. We are going to rape your wives. That didn't happen. That is oppression. We didn't ask to be here. We're not the same migrants that y'all constantly come up against. We didn't run away from home. We were stolen. So yeah, we are going to sit here and be offended when you want to sit here and act like, and don't let it escape you that it is white men on this side of the aisle telling us, people of color on this side of the aisle, that y'all are the ones being oppressed, that y'all are the ones that are being harmed. That's not the definition of oppression. You tell me the prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment that you've had, and we can have a conversation.
You could start with Exodus.
The final thing that I will say on this particular issue, two things. There is an article from The Guardian, and it is a little old. It's from 2021, so I apologize. But it said that back then, just 3 years ago, white men represent 30% of the population, but 62% of office holders. These are the issues that we are constantly looking at and recognizing and trying to say, is this just? I can't even tell you how many white men have served in this chamber, but I can tell you that I am only the 55th Black woman to be elected to Congress. And so when you want to talk about history and pretend as if it was so long ago, it wasn't. Because again, I am just number 55. Finally, when we start to talk about what do these numbers do, as we're trying to say the diversity, equity, and inclusion is the problem, the reality is that when it comes to financial performance, companies with more diverse workforces are more likely to outperform their competitors. Companies in the top quartile for racial diversity are 35% more likely to outperform their peers on profitability. Companies with diverse executive teams are 25% more likely to generate greater profits. Diverse companies earn 2.5 times higher cash flow per employee. Diversity works. And until you can show me data that says otherwise, I think that we need to go back to being a country that listens to experts and gets out of our feelings and recognizes, again, that racism is real in this country, and until we stop pretending that it's not, we will not solve the problems that we are consistently facing, and that will bring real unity that we seek when we're looking for a more perfect union.
Does any other member seek recognition?
Okay, all right. So we love the Constitution today, and we also want to talk about foreign money coming in. Have y'all seen the report that was just produced where this chairman decided that he was going to block this committee from receiving additional information about y'all's guy, Trump, and all the money that he took? From what we did receive, we know that Trump got almost $6 million that we can account for, and we know that there's more there. From China specifically, we found almost $8 million total that he accepted from foreign governments while he was serving as the president of these United States. But we're concerned about the president's son who has not been involved in his administration. I just want to run it back, though, to the very beginning, because this is something that I just can't get over. I can't get over the gentle lady from South Carolina talking about white privilege. So let me tell you something. Y'all don't know what white privilege looks like, but I'm gonna show you a little bit of something. You see, you want to talk about a two-tier justice system, and this is the only time that y'all have ever referenced it, when this country has a history when it comes to black and brown folk of having two separate sets of rules. And right now what you want to do is have two separate sets of rules because Mr. Moskowitz offered y'all a fair situation. He said he would vote for Hunter to be held in contempt if y'all voted to hold all, even if you remove all of the members of Congress. There's still other people that y'all haven't decided that y'all have excuses for, but y'all don't want to hold them in contempt. But for some reason, it makes sense to hold Hunter Biden in contempt, who has tried to comply. And let me tell you why nobody wants to talk to y'all behind closed doors, because y'all lie. That's just the bottom line. You have done it thus far in this investigation. You have done it this far as it relates to this committee. In every single hearing, y'all spin, spin, spin. I don't know how y'all are still standing right now because you should be quite dizzy from all the spinning that you're constantly doing when it comes to spinning the truth. You talk about free and fair elections, but you back a guy who we know tried to steal the election. And this isn't about what Democrats have to say. Let me remind you, for those of you that don't know how the justice system works, it's not a matter of the president went in and indicted Trump, but we are talking about grand juries. Grand juries are comprised of American citizens, and the people that have entered pleas of guilty that will be flipping on your leader in a minute, they are Republicans. I do want to point that out. And half of them were Republicans that were handpicked by Donald Trump himself.
I'd like to just add a couple of points to what you've said. On January 6th, Senator Ted Cruz described it as terrorism. They later came to attack him during their revisionist, Orwellian, Stalinist attempt to rewrite history. Unfortunately for them, we know that there were 147 or 48 of our officers who were wounded, bloodied, and hospitalized by the rabid mob that beset the Capitol that day. We know that Kevin McCarthy, one of their deposed leaders over on their side, called Donald Trump from his office to complain about how his people were storming the Capitol and putting people's lives in danger. And Donald Trump said, no, those aren't my people, those are Antifa. And McCarthy corrected him and said, no, those are your people, Mr. President. To which Donald Trump said, well, maybe they just care a little bit more about who won the election than you did, Kevin McCarthy. You guys have got to deal with reality here. By the way, the speech and debate clause stands for the exact opposite principle who our distinguished new member just spoke about a moment ago. It says that members of Congress cannot be questioned anywhere else other than Congress. So he should read the speech or debate clause aloud.
Let him finish his sentence there. Now, Chair recognizes Mr. Burchett from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
In addition to that, we just heard about AFT and what they're advocating for. And I know that there was a comment that you made as relates to discipline and how that's something AFT should be advocating for so that teachers can be safer. Is that correct? Am I characterizing what you said correctly?
I believe that both the NEA and the AFT should endorse policies that keep educators safe. Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you a quick question. Actually, I would like for all three of you to answer this question. It's just a yes or no. We'll start at this end. When you were growing up and going through school, did you ever have to go through an active shooter drill? Yes or no?
No.
No.
Oh, okay. All right. So can we agree that guns being kept out of schools may be one of those things that could keep not only teachers safe, but also students safe? Yes or no?
Yes.
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 Okay. Thank you. So I do want to touch on a few things that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez talked about, because I don't really know the breadth of your understanding or experiences. But to give a little clarity to the district that I come from, 20% of my district live at or below poverty. And I do come from an urban district. I do have a majority minority district. I know that we've talked about DEI and diversity. And I find that when I'm here, I am constantly fighting to make sure that I can break through the noise and the stereotypes that exist around not only my kiddos in my district, but just my constituents. And one of the things that maybe some of you have never experienced, I don't know, is the fact that one of the leading reasons that students in my district don't show up to school is because they are poor, because some of them are homeless. We found that there were children that didn't go to school because they didn't have clean clothes. That is something that certain people don't have to worry about. And they found that if they brought in washing machines so that kids wouldn't make fun of them because they had clean clothes, that they would show up. These are things that maybe in a more affluent district, they may not need money for. So while one of my colleagues talked about how much investment has to go into some of these school districts in the inner city, I do want to make it clear that there are different obstacles that my kiddos deal with. In addition to the fact that I practiced criminal defense work prior to coming into the legislative realm. And in my district, I have the highest incarcerated zip codes in the entire state. What that means is that sometimes I have children that go home and they don't have parents to go home to. Or if they are going home to parents, their parents may be involved in things that aren't necessarily the best things for kids to be around. And so, as it's already been stated, sometimes the safest space is at school for some of these children. And what is so annoying to me is that we debate whether or not we will invest in our futures. As far as I'm concerned, there is no better investment than in our children. Because if we are going to make sure that this country continues on, it's not going to start by investing in people that look like me or of my age. It starts with making sure that there's a foundation. And I just want to say that I am thankful for those teachers that decided to go in, even when they were under-resourced, even given of their own resources, to make it happen. I lost teachers in my district during the pandemic because they literally risked their lives in the midst of a pandemic to show up because they love those kids that much, because I can tell you, the pay is not there. Teachers aren't getting rich. Maybe professors, but not teachers. And so the fact is, I've talked to my school districts. They were able to take advantage of the extra money that was given to them, but guess what? They still had gaps that they needed to fill. And the reason that I brought up gun violence is, number one, it's a safety issue, but also as it relates to the mental health. Children nowadays know where they need to go in case somebody comes in. They're looking for the closet. That is no way for kids in America to live. So we need to make sure that we put kids first. Thank you so much, and with that, I will yield.
I'd like to draw your attention to a tweet that I know that you're familiar with. On the post forward, it says, "You're not a horse. You're not a cow. Seriously, y'all, stop it." Another sarcastic tweet from the FDA read, "Hold your horses, y'all. Ivermectin may be trending, but it isn't authorized or approved to treat COVID-19. The FDA put out these messages in 2021 and made similar posts on the other platforms to discourage people from using ivermectin to prevent or treat COVID. In January 2022, the FDA was sued by a number of doctors who claimed that you were practicing medicine as an organization. As part of that settlement, you were forced to delete these. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, in fact, the U.S. Court of Appeals said the FDA is not a physician, and even tweet-sized doses of personalized medical advice are beyond your statutory authority. Is that correct?
That's what the court said.
I'm glad that the courts told you to remove these tweets, because it is snarky. I think it's demeaning to the American people, and certainly demeaning to people, I believe, in my district.
Now, Chair recognizes Ms. Crockett from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Dr. Califf, thank you so much for being here. You know, you are a brave man. I don't know who would want to sign up for your job, especially in a time in which it seems like we don't believe in science, or we don't know what data is, or we just gonna ignore it. I'm not really sure. I do want to do a quick level set on something, and I don't know how we continue to come back to this, but let me just ask you a few questions. Was COVID-19 real?
Yes, I had it myself twice. I think twice, once or twice.
Did people die?
Just in the U.S. alone, over 1 million people. It was in the top 3 causes of death for many months. And I had friends, you know, I was an intensive care unit doctor. When I came to FDA, I stopped practicing, but my friends in ICUs were overwhelmed. Hospitals had to have trucks backing up to the hospital because there wasn't enough room for all the dead people.
And did vaccines save lives?
Yes, thank you for asking that again. People that are up to date on their vaccines have a significantly lower risk of being dead or admitted to an intensive care unit compared to those who are not up to date on the vaccine. And the worst of all are people not vaccinated at all. That's true on the individual level. If you look at counties in the U.S., the counties with a higher vaccination rate have lower death rates from COVID. If you look at countries, you see the same general relationship. So the vaccines have been highly effective.
Thank you so much
Not
for that.
perfect, but highly effective.
I understand. I don't know that there is any perfection. I know that there's none in this chamber. Nevertheless, as a result of an administration that believes in science and data, we now have ARPA-H, which ARPA stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. And my district, luckily, was the recipient of an ARPA-H customer experience centers. And I'm so excited because this means that as we are looking at trials, as we're looking at diversifying them, we will have a great opportunity right there in Texas 30. It is a huge investment in science to make sure that we can save lives. And when the next pandemic arrives, we will actually be prepared and have science so that we can stay on top of this. Because the last time I checked, and doctor, correct me if I'm wrong, having a leader suggest that we should inject bleach. Are you aware of anyone being cured of COVID-19 because they injected bleach into their body?
I am unaware of any such thing. If I might comment in general, and this relates back to the discussion about ivermectin. I came along when heart attacks, no one knew what caused a heart attack. That was what I focused on. We tried 100 different things for the treatment of heart attack. Only a couple of them worked, the others didn't. And the only reason we knew what worked is we went from the idea to doing a well-conducted study, a randomized trial. And then, if it worked, then all the practitioners began to adopt it and use it. So we now treat heart attacks by going to the cath lab, opening the artery, and some medicines that work. Ivermectin has been studied multiple times in randomized trials, no benefit. But it is highly effective for the treatment. I use the word worms as a generic term for the kinds of infections that typically occur in places like Asia that can be devastating. It got a Nobel Prize because it's effective for those, and it's been a lifesaver, but it's been ineffective in COVID.
I completely understand.
The last area that I'm going to touch on in my last 45 seconds, because I am a woman out of the state of Texas, there is no way that I am going to have a conversation and not talk about reproductive access. So out of curiosity, would you consider the medical management of a miscarriage to be potentially a life-saving usage? Yes or no?
I have to decline to answer that because
That
it's
is
under
perfectly fine.
adjudication by the Supreme Court.
That is perfectly fine. I'm gonna tell you yes, but I'm gonna give you another question that you can answer. Would you consider erectile dysfunction as a life-saving usage for Viagra?
Not life-saving.
Not life-saving. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you that based on my research, that mifepristone actually has life-saving characteristics, yet Viagra doesn't. And for those that don't know, Viagra, from my understanding, is actually nearly 10 times greater as it relates to risk of death. Yet for some reason, it's not sitting in the court right now. And I do appreciate the fact that you laid out that when it comes down to getting drugs approved, they actually go through trials. It's not just randomness. You take the randomness, you then say, maybe there's some evidence here, and then you put it through the ringer. After putting it through the ringer for decades, women's lives have been saved. And as a representative from the area that Roe v. Wade actually initiated, I am appalled because for whatever reason, some people want us to go back to horse and buggy in this country. And I think since now maybe we have the internet, maybe we should take advantage of it. And we shouldn't say that we should remain in the times of horse and buggy. And so with that, thank you for the work that the FDA does. I respect your research. I recognize that the courts don't do research. I also recognize that this chamber seemingly doesn't care about research. But because of the work that you do, there are lives that are being saved, and I need you to be funded to the fullest extent to make sure that we can continue to save American lives. Thank you.
Chair now recognize Ms. Crockett for 1 minute, or 5 minutes.
1 minute. All right. First of all, Mr. Bobulinski, do you know who Elections LLC is? Yeah.
Mike.
Well, it's not a who.
Okay, well, do you know what it is?
Yes, it's a LLC.
Okay, and is it the LLC that your attorney works for?
I believe so, yes.
You believe so, okay. So at this point in time, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a document indicating that the law firm representing Tony Bobulinski was paid $10,000 as recently as January of this year by the Save America PAC, which you may recognize as Donald Trump's PAC.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, so far in this hearing, it has felt like the worst episode of The Apprentice. I'm sure you're familiar with that show. It seems like my colleagues and maybe you and some others are trying to become the next vice president of the United States of America. You're auditioning or something like that. I want to be clear that when we were behind closed doors, you called a number of people liars. You called the Wall Street Journal liars. You called Cassidy Hutchinson a liar. You called the FBI a liar. You called Rob Walker a liar. You called James Gilliar a liar. You called Hunter Biden a liar. You called Jim Biden a liar. And just today, you added to your list, you called my colleague, Congressman Mr. Goldman, a liar as well. It seems like, according to you, the only person that's telling the truth is you, and everyone else is lying. But I want to move on to something else.
Is that a question?
It's not a question.
Oh, okay.
You'll know when I ask you a question, I promise.
Thank you.
So, the other thing that I want to talk about is the fact that my colleague from the other side of the aisle talked about the company that we keep. And she wanted to go through a list of people that she felt like were bad company because right now the majority has been relying upon the testimony of someone who's currently sitting in federal prison. And we know that your company is the company of somebody who's been found liable of fraud, as well as defamation, as well as sexual assault, and for whatever reason can't pay his bills at this point in time. But I'm gonna ask Mr. Parnas, so this is a question to him. Are you aware if Trump had any associates that have been found guilty of anything?
Yes, lots of them.
Lots of them.
Me included.
You included. Okay, so when you were called here to testify, you weren't called here to testify for any other reason than to tell the truth. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Now, we started this whole sham off because of the 1023, and that was debunked by you, was it not?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Way before we started this impeachment inquiry. And you mentioned a number of times this guy by the name of Rudy Giuliani.
Yes.
Now, you know, everybody is so stressed about the fact that Hunter ain't here today. But you know, Hunter came and testified behind closed doors for over 6 hours. And every single one of them, they weren't limited to 5 minutes. They could ask whatever they wanted to. And there is a full transcript of his testimony. So I don't know what else they wanted to do besides the fact that they wanted to put on a show. But let me tell you something. This whole thing is based upon something that Giuliani came up with.
Yes.
And we tried to subpoena him that's what I remember. If anybody else remember, we asked, we said, hey, we should subpoena Giuliani. But you know, kind of like when we were trying to get his cell phone, they shut it down, right? Like they don't want the facts. But you would agree with me that considering the fact that you were working under Rudy Giuliani at the time that you went over to Ukraine, that he has maybe some valuable information that he could offer this committee as to whether or not there's anything that we should be investigating in the first place.
Absolutely, Congresswoman. I wish that this committee would subpoena Rudy Giuliani, put him under oath alongside me to get to the bottom of the truth of what actually happened in Ukraine and to the manipulation that Trump and Giuliani and the team went to do.
I agree with you, but somehow it doesn't look like we're going to get there, and I thank you for your time. With that, I'll yield.
Time's expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to this ridiculous Republican attempt to deny reality. You know, I must first start off by making sure that I can respond to some things that were just said. As a member of the Agriculture Committee, you probably know, just like I do, that we have a thing that we've been fighting for called sustainable aviation fuels. And this is something that we know. In speaking to organizations such as Boeing, we know that we can actually operate planes off of something like sustainable aviation fuels, and they are ready to do the hard work. And guess what? Our farmers are ready to participate. Our farmers need to make sure that they are going to expand their options for earning $1 because we have this thing called climate change that's taking place. It seems like advancements in technology are not what we're looking for. No one is saying that it's either or. What we're saying is that we need to make progress instead of being regressive. And so under this current administration, we know that we have a record amount of oil that is being produced, but that doesn't mean that we can't also be smart about our energy and move forward. So let me get to my prepared remarks. Instead of taking action to build on President Biden's progress, House Republicans would rather sit on the sidelines in the least productive Congress in modern history and ridicule rather than serve. In this resolution, Republicans ridicule the president's energy supply chain policy, but while Republicans ridicule Biden brings results. President Biden and the Democratic Party—
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Madam Speaker, I'll yield the gentlewoman another 2 minutes.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. President Biden and the Democratic Party brought billions of dollars in investment into the U.S. energy sector through the Inflation Reduction Act. Republicans ridicule the president's record on jobs in the energy sector, but Biden is bringing over 1.4 million jobs to the U.S. through the IRA. Republicans ridicule the president's record on gas prices. These are the same Republicans, by the way, who are refusing to lift a finger to get critical aid to Ukraine, which would lower gas prices even more. Nevertheless, despite Republican inaction by sharing intelligence and training with the Ukrainians, Biden broke the blockade, lowering Americans' gas prices. Republicans ridicule the president's record on home energy affordability, but Biden brought billions of dollars to help families in need to pay their energy bills in each and every one of our districts through the LEHEP program, which Republicans refuse to fully fund. The fact is, we know what Republicans want to do with our energy sector. They showed us
protest when they passed H.R. 1, which would put polluters over people. So without a positive agenda of their own, they stand on the sidelines to ridicule President Biden's agenda. I appreciate this resolution, if for no other reason than it clarifies where my colleagues on the other side of the aisle stand. I want the American people to know that Republican ridicule of President Biden's agenda to combat climate crisis by lowering energy costs and investing in America, while Republicans ridicule, Biden brings results. With that, I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much, Administrator, for being here. A couple of things that I want to try to run through as quickly as possible. Are you familiar with NOAA?
NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration?
Yes.
Yes.
And out of curiosity, you obviously knew what NOAA stood for. When we are trying to prepare for these disasters as they are impending, do you rely on information that you receive from them in getting prepared for a potential disaster?
NOAA is a critical partner of FEMA's, whether it's through their National Hurricane Center to give us forecasts for where hurricanes and the strength of hurricanes are going to hit, or the National Water Center that helps us understand what the flooding impacts are going to be, or the Severe Weather Center that talks about tornado forecasts. All of this is important to make sure that, one, we can inform individuals that are in harm's way, but also help us prepare and pre-position our resources to support any immediate response needs.
Thank you for that. So you'd agree with me that any administration that would decide that it wants to get rid of NOAA, that would probably make your job that much more difficult?
Without the scientific data that we get from NOAA to help us make decisions and warn the public, it would make that job more difficult.
Okay, I want to talk about money, and I want to talk about it a lot here in a minute. Listen, we had a vote that was right before these terrible hurricanes that we've been talking about, Milton and Helene, came in. And in that particular vote, we had an opportunity to decide how much funding was going to go to FEMA. And it is my understanding that on this committee, we had a few members that decided that they were not going to vote in support of that funding. I don't know how closely you follow, but we had a number of members who actually serve not only on this committee, but they serve in states that have been mentioned, such as Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And right now, it is my understanding that we're having a hearing because there is a concern about a specific individual who potentially skipped, I think the total was 20 homes, correct? And in those 20 homes, if you had to guess, and I don't know if you've been back to those 20 homes at this point in time to see what resources, if any, were needed, but if you had to guess approximately how much money are we talking about did not potentially get distributed immediately to those 20 homes?
All 20 homes have been revisited by our disaster survivor assistance teams. I do not know how many have actually applied for assistance, but the maximum amount that's available for an individual through this disaster was $42,500 for housing assistance and another possible $42,500 for other needs assistance.
Okay. What I'm hearing, though, is we're talking about 20 houses. The data that I have in front of me shows that over 18,000 interactions have been conducted for survivors of both Hurricane Helene and Milton. Is that approximately correct?
I would say that that number is probably much higher than that.
Okay. Give me your number. Well, somewhere, let's presuppose that the number was 18,000. If we talked about 20 out of 18,000, that would mean that we are currently using resources to have a hearing about 0.1% of interactions. So this is not something that we would consider to be widespread when we start talking about percentages that are as low as 0.1%. In addition to that, it's my understanding that as of November 13th, FEMA has delivered over 16 million meals, over 18 million liters of water, over 3,000 rolls of blue roof sheeting, over 700,000 gallons of fuel, and additionally, FEMA has delivered over 2,000 tractor-trailer deliveries containing critical supplies. Do you have any reason to have any discrepancies about those numbers?
No.
In addition to that, it's my understanding, oh, I'm sorry, you're right, that over 671,000 households impacted by Hurricane Helene have received over $503 million from FEMA's Serious Needs Program.
and over 218,000 households impacted by Hurricane Milton have received over $145 million. Yet and still, we had members on this committee. It looks like we had, there were 82 members that opposed the bill to fund when we knew that this was coming, thanks to NOAA, and 19 of the 26 Republicans on this oversight committee voted against the bill to keep FEMA funded, and 9 are in states that were directly hit. I don't understand why we come in and pretend that we have all these issues with your agency, and I thank you for your service, when you don't want to fund it. You can't complain about these issues, and when we're talking about, you know, the people that got skipped over, maybe or maybe not, ultimately, there was a concern about safety. Now, hopefully we will get the full investigation, but we know that it was Trump that was out there himself. He was putting out disinformation and misinformation to the extent that y'all had to set up an entire website to try to combat it. That was in disservice to all Americans, because when a hurricane hits, it doesn't go into the Democratic areas. It doesn't go to the independents. It doesn't go to the Republicans. It goes to American citizens. It is time for us to decide that we are going to work together and make sure that we can take care of people regardless of the decisions that they decide to make on who they want to put into the White House. And I thank you for your service, and I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As legislators, it's our job to make sure we are not moving forward with drafting legislation that is on its face flawed. If we want to legislate and address immigration, let's mean what we say and do so in an effective manner. And this bill does not live up to that standard. The inclusion of the term actively assisting is ripe for judicial scrutiny and will undoubtedly result in court challenges, wasting taxpayer dollars and government resources. But fiscal issues caused by poor legislative drafting are the least of my concerns with this bill. This language is so deeply concerning because we already have been witnessing how aggressive policing tactics and unconstitutional racial profiling directed by rogue governors like Governor Greg Abbott have led to severe harm to and has undermined our legal system, all in the name of actively assisting the U.S. Border Patrol. Take, for instance, this past Christmas, where U.S. citizens, a husband, wife, their 13-year-old daughter, and their grandmother living in El Paso were wrongfully targeted by Texas officers in unmarked vehicles after they were coming back from visiting relatives just across the border in Mexico. The officers ran the family off the road, and at least 4 Texas Department of Public Safety officers wearing street clothes and tactical vests quickly surrounded their car and began pointing semi-automatic rifles at them. Because of the accident, the grandmother had to receive x-rays and still has lingering back pain. The daughter, likely traumatized from having weapons of war pointed at her and her family. No one, including me, doubts more must be done to address the problems we are seeing at the border. But this type of unlawful harassment of citizens is not it. And to be clear, my amendment in no way prevents federal, state, or local officers from working with Border Patrol agents, nor does it say that federal, state, and local officers do not have a role to play here. In fact, several border counties, including counties in Texas, already have U.S. Customs and Border Protection memoranda of understanding with state and local officials to work with immigration enforcement. Nothing in my amendment would prevent these written agreements that lay out their clear chains of command and clear codes of conduct. But what my amendment does is to prevent state and local law enforcement from acting lawlessly at the misguided direction of a governor who refuses to work with men and women of the United States Border Patrol because he thinks he is above the law. If my Republican colleagues reject this amendment and keep the current language, they are supporting actions that have historically lacked due diligence to prevent harm and encourage lawlessness that leads to more dangerous instances like the one that occurred at Christmas. If the House rejects this amendment, it will give Governor Abbott a tool to carry on in his unconstitutional border policies without federal oversight and coordination. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment. Thank you, and I reserve.
Gentlelady from Texas reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I'll declaim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment requires a new fact to be proven at trial, that the pursuing law enforcement officer was, quote, under the command of the U.S. Border Patrol in each and every case. Well, I can imagine many circumstances where local law enforcement's alerted to a Border Patrol chase that's going through their jurisdiction and then act immediately to assist them without necessarily being directly under their command. The issue is not who is pursuing smugglers, but rather the circumstances of the pursuit. Namely, this person is evading the Border Patrol. It's unlikely that during each and every pursuit in progress, the Border Patrol is going to have time to deputize local law enforcement, place them under their command. This is a ridiculous expectation, so ridiculous as to raise the suspicion that it's intended solely to render the bill unworkable and meaningless. These high-speed chases occur far too often in our border communities, and state and local law enforcement are often first responders in protecting these communities along with the Border Patrol.
If this is going to be a federal issue, then the federal government needs to be the ones that are absolutely going to be over federal law. So they can have memorandums of understanding. If that means that every single county at the border needs to go ahead and enter into a memorandum of understanding, then they need to. But this is a federal issue. It is not a state issue. And this protects federalism and makes sure that it will be under the hands of the federal government with this federal law instead of state government. And I reserve.
Reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I'm prepared to close when the gentlelady's finished.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
I'll yield back.
Gentlelady from Texas yields. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I was just shocked to hear the gentlelady accuse the governor of Texas of murder. This is an example of the kind of extremism that we see on the left in this House today. Now, the fact is the Border Patrol agents are strained to the breaking point by this administration's open border policies, and they often rely on local law enforcement having their backs. You want to know what active assistance is? It's a high-speed chase is going through your community, and you're there in a position to back up the Border Patrol. You can't negotiate that. You cannot be deputized. That is part and parcel of law enforcement. You have to spring into action. Whenever local police are providing this assistance, they should have the protection that this bill provides. And it also puts every smuggler on notice that if you're trafficking human beings or drugs across the border and you're pursued, well, you darn well better pull over. Apparently, this is just too much for the Democrats to bear. I'm not sure whether we should laugh this amendment off the floor or merely defeat it, but in either event, it's a foolish idea. It deserves a no vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California yields. The question on the amendment is offered by the gentlelady from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those in favor say no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Speaker,
for what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise?
I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas will be postponed.
We are talking about immigrants a lot. In fact, there's a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric and blaming of immigrants when certain things happen. And based on things coming out of this committee, we seem to believe that immigrants are the reason why crime is up and why our communities are less safe. So I did my research, and I want to go through some of it with you, specifically about Tarrant County, because I don't want you to have to know statistics about somewhere else. So with that being said, Sheriff, do you know if within the last year between 2022 and 2023, if there was an increase or decrease in murder and negligent homicide in Tarrant County?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it did not increase.
Okay. In fact, it went down by almost 17%. So great job. What about manslaughter by negligence, or we call it criminally negligent homicide?
I believe it also went down.
Yes.
It may be on ticking up at the moment on intoxicated and homicide may be ticking up at the moment in 24.
Okay, well, we had a 56.52% decrease. How about rape?
all those categories we believe went down.
Absolutely.
And I do credit a lot of incredible law enforcement and municipal police chiefs.
Awesome. So there actually was a decrease by 3.35% in rape. Robbery went down 4.5%, and both aggravated and simple assault went collectively down by 3.18%, and theft went down by 3.89%. This is at the same time in which we're talking about the migrant community and stoking these fears that they're bringing all of this trauma and this crime and violence to our communities. But when we look at a Texas community, Tarrant County, actually everything has gone down. And I do want to thank you for your service in that way, because it takes a team. It can't just be one thing. It means we've got to have great law enforcement, but we also have to have really good policies, and we honestly need to be honest about the data that we see. So overall, it shows me that sheriff in Tarrant County, all crime was down, is what I can tell from the numbers. And do you know if Dallas County, which is next door, if they had an increase or decrease in overall crime?
I think all of North Texas, we saw decreases.
Absolutely.
Every one. And again, Chief Garcia, Chief Neil Noakes, there's some great police work going on in both of those counties.
Absolutely. So I'm going to move on to something else really quickly. One of the things that I want to talk about is the border in general and policies. I'm not sure that you're aware, but I'm going to make sure that it's clear that the Senate worked on a bill, much like the Senate has done a lot more work than the House has done this entire session. And the only reason that that bill has not come to the floor to help those that need help as it relates to the border crisis is because Donald Trump specifically said that it should not come to the floor. In addition to that, I want to talk specifically about some concerns that I do have in Tarrant County. While I am so thankful that the numbers have gone down, there's been a concern about the fact that there has been a consultant that's had to come in, and this consultant has had to come into Tarrant County potentially to the tune of approximately $200,000 for an 18-month contract to help the elected sheriff identify solutions for an extensive list of jail deaths, an alarming shortage in detention officer staff, and the necessity for Tarrant County to address its overcrowded jail by entering into a $40 million contract with a privatized jail outfit to house Tarrant County's inmates in Garza County. That is concerning to me. It is concerning because as a former public defender, I actually had clients that died in the jail, and most people don't understand that the main job of a sheriff is usually to make sure that they're taking care of the jail population. And so, Sheriff, I want to make sure that while they've brought you to D.C., that we make sure that we're taking care of Tarrant County, where you and I both are locally elected to serve, because we cannot have a situation in which we have violations of people's civil rights potentially due to overcrowding, or we can't have a situation where we're losing lives because we are helping out our friends who are trying to stoke more fears about the migrant community. Because the one thing that we know from the data is when it comes to migrants in the state of Texas, specifically in Tarrant County, if anything, it looks like the numbers have gone down as far as crime overall instead of going up. And so we know that while it is a team effort, this idea that this president is doing something so nefarious that he is trying to bring people in so that he can get them to vote for him or he can get them to help out a census in a particular state, that's just not what the case is. But I do thank you for your time, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Gentlewoman, Ms. Crockett is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I do want to clear up some actual misinformation. Dr. Snyder, when you were testifying earlier, you were actually responding to questions that were posed by another colleague from Texas. One of the questions was, who was the president in 2008? And to be clear, Obama ran in 2008, but Obama did not swear in until 2009. So when my colleague asked about invasions from Russia, actually in 2008, Russia was invading Georgia, and it was another Texan that was the president at the time, and that was George Bush. In addition to that, one of the things that my colleague did not inquire about, but I want to make sure we're clear about, is that Trump was president in 2019 when he threatened to withhold aid to the Ukrainians as they were being threatened by the Russians. So I do want to make sure that we do that. You know, what is wild to me is that this word patriot seems to be getting co-opted for propagandists, because that's what they do. All right, so we're going to talk about what my colleague from Georgia, she talked about misinformation, and I don't know what she was talking about, but nevertheless, we can look at her own tweets and we can find plenty of misinformation, but we're just going to go through one specific tweet. Now, she said that we need to work with Israel to track down the serial numbers on any U.S. weapons used by Hamas against Israel. Dr. Snyder, I may be going out on a limb, but are you aware that that was actually just propaganda that was put out and there actually were not U.S. weapons that were being used by Hamas as she attempted to insinuate in this tweet?
I mean, first of all, I appreciate the clarification. I knew that the question, who were the American presidents, was going to be the toughest one I got from that side. So I appreciate your helping me out. Yes, I mean, obviously there what you have is a typical example of American-Russian messaging where the implicit idea is supposed to be we shouldn't give weapons to Ukraine because they're going to end up going somewhere else. There's no evidence for that. It's hard to think of an example where American weapons have been leveraged with such success as on the Ukrainian battlefield.
Thank you so much. In fact, for some people, especially people that serve on the committee, they may be surprised to know that it's actually a former Russian president and Putin's sidekick, Dmitry, and I don't want to slaughter his name, so I'm going to say Dmitry M., who actually she quote tweeted. See, the problem that we're having, and the reason that we're bringing up Russia as well, is because Russia is a threat as well as China. So we are not going to sit here and pretend as if it's only one or the other. But the biggest problem that we have is we have people that sit in this chamber and they spread the misinformation. If it was left in Russia or China, whatever. But the problem is that you have people that sit in positions of power and they have a $2 million budget. You think that they would call on some staff to find out if they were telling the truth about the things that they're putting on social media, but instead it works for their rhetoric. Right now, what we see is that people are dying, and we cannot get the support that we need from the public because they continue to peddle lies. And I'm tired of it because I didn't come to this chamber to play games. I came to this chamber to answer to the people, the American people, and to make sure that we keep the American people safe. And if we don't get something done, as they talk about the border, I do want to be clear, the only reason we haven't gotten funding for the border is because they killed, the House Republicans here, killed the bill that they actually sent us from the Senate side. If they want to do some work, let me tell you something, the Democrats are ready, and it seems like the Senate Republicans are ready too. They just need to get to it and stop peddling Putin's lies. Thank you, and I yield. First and foremost, I recently was appointed to the Weaponization Subcommittee, and so I'm going to have plenty of long days ahead of me, kind of like what I have here on oversight. But the point of the Weaponization Committee was to have a conversation about the government being weaponized in a way so that people could somehow get some personal gain, because there's this theory that this administration has somehow weaponized the government. There is not this acknowledgement that the other guy just is a criminal, because that's just too hard to believe, even though he currently is sitting in New York facing criminal charges that were not brought by the federal government, but instead by state government. Nevertheless, so when I think about weaponization, I honestly can only think about Trump and his administration and all the work that he did to harm federal employees. So to be clear, Trump's 2020 executive order would have effectively gutted civil service job protections for workers across the federal government. Trump would have created politically charged firings of potentially thousands of federal workers and made these public servants subject to the whims of a political dictator and his posse rather than the adherence of the tenets of our Constitution. So let's be clear. Individuals pursuing public service do so largely because of their belief in government. I'm sure you can make a lot more money if you just decided to go elsewhere in private industry. A lot of us could, honestly. But if this rule is implemented, it would destroy the little bit of foundation and structure public servants still have that allow them to put people over politics. How do I know this? Because Trump and his Republican lackeys stated they felt nonpartisan bureaucrats were hampering Trump's policies, and he wanted to, quote, shatter the deep state. In fact, President Donald Trump's personnel chief, John McEntee, told agency officials at a meeting to implement staffing changes and movements across the government. Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record an article from Axios stating that Mr. John McEntee, a 29-year-old at the time, a former body man to Trump, who was fired in 2018 by then Chief of Staff John Kelly, but then rehired and promoted to head the Presidential Personnel Office, directed staff to identify anti-Trumpers and stated that they will no longer get promotions and will be shifted around agencies.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. Now, Mr. Miller, can you tell us how the implementation of Schedule F would impact the morale and performance of all federal employees?
Thank you, Congresswoman. This is a critical issue and a critical question in the first week in office. President Biden canceled Schedule F. This is real for OMB. The vast majority of our staff in 2020 was being considered to move to Schedule F. I think this would have a debilitating impact on the basic performance of federal agencies. We already have a system where 3,000 different roles are for political appointees. Those political appointees are in leadership and decision-making roles overseeing their agencies. If we were to go down the path that you outlined, where there were arbitrary or political decisions made instead of decisions made around expertise and experience, it would deeply harm the institutional knowledge in our agencies, but it would also deeply harm our ability to recruit talent going forward into organizations that we want to organize around performance.
Thank you so much for your answer, and I absolutely agree. My mother has worked in I don't know how many federal agencies since I was a little girl in elementary school, and I promise you, we have changed from Democrats to Republicans to MAGA, back to all the things. But I can tell you that she is so very qualified to do her work, and this would be devastating. Thank you so much, and I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you so much. Boy, oh boy, what a welcome to this committee. Okay, so I want to start off with a quick little level set of a few things, because I believe in facts and not fiction. So I'm going to ask each of the witnesses if you can answer a simple question. Who won the 2020 election? Let's start right here.
Joe Biden.
Thank you.
Joe Biden.
Thank you.
Joe Biden.
Thank you.
Joe Biden.
Thank you. This is amazing. Unanimous. Joe Biden won in 2020. So when people start posting things like Joe Biden didn't win on social media, to the extent that as we're talking so much about polling, because we're headed into the 2024 election, we have so many people that don't believe that Joe Biden won the election, and most of them tend to be on the other side of the aisle. It is because there was misinformation and disinformation that was put out over and over on social media. Now, let me try to see if I can ask you another question and see what kind of answers we get. This one is a little trickier. Did the COVID rate of deaths decrease after the vaccines were released or increase after the vaccine was released?
Decrease.
Decrease.
I'd have to review the data, but are you just talking about the COVID rate of deaths or all excess mortality?
No, the COVID-related deaths.
I believe that the COVID-related deaths declined, but in the Delta period, I'm not sure. That's why I'm hesitating.
Thank you so much.
They declined.
They declined by approximately 90% in the first 6 months.
Well, I love that data right there. Thank you. Okay. All right, so here's the deal. I'm annoyed by this hearing because, number one, it is Groundhog's Day all over again. We have had some version of these hearings, and we've talked about misinformation, disinformation, and I do want to make sure that we understand what it means to have a First Amendment protection. So I am going to start over here. When we talk about the Constitution, for those that don't understand how it works, is it limitless and there's no restrictions to any of our constitutional rights?
No.
It's not limitless, is it?
No.
In fact, I know that my colleagues believe there's no limits to the Second Amendment, and it sounds like they believe there's no limits to the First Amendment, but I remember when Trump got banned from Twitter, and that probably saved the country. Nevertheless, it at least would have saved him some money, because right now he just got caught up in court for, never mind, we're not gonna talk about Truth Social right now, but there are limits on the First Amendment and what can be done. So number one, let's talk about who the actor has to be. The actor, when we're talking about the First Amendment, has to be the government, correct?
Correct.
All right, and if we're talking about actions of the government, which there's allegations of some nefarious thing that was going on behind the scenes where the government is really co-opting social media, and so therefore they are the government actors, can you talk about some of the things that are limited? Are acts of violence okay to limit under the First Amendment?
In certain circumstances, yes.
Okay. What about libel or slander?
Again, in certain circumstances, yes.
Okay, so flat out falsities that can potentially cause harm, they also could be limited too, huh?
That's correct.
Okay, all right, so now we know, even though we're talking about social media, which last time I checked is not run by the government, we know that First Amendment rights can be limited. But what is so interesting about this hearing is that basically what the Republicans are arguing for is carte blanche. We should be allowing anybody to say whatever, and that's how we get so much Russian propaganda. I would like that this party stop peddling Putin's lies and focus on making sure that we can put forth truth that we can all respect and understand. And with that, I will yield.
Gentlelady from Texas, recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. This is so interesting. A couple of things. I'm just curious to know, as we're talking about lawyers and the obligations of lawyers, and whether or not maybe the former president has any idea of what good lawyer obligations look like, I'm just gonna ask, we're not gonna play, we're gonna do Ms. Winebanks. Have you heard of any of these lawyers? I've got Robert Cheeley, Kenneth Chesborough, Jeffrey Clark, Matthew DePerno, John Eastman, Jenna Ellis, Michael Farino, Rudy Giuliani, Julia Halia. I got a long list. Have you heard of any of these people?
I have.
Are you aware as to whether or not any of them have faced criminal penalties?
Yes, and also been disbarred or suspended.
Oh, yeah, okay. So they've had some issues, but these are the hand-picked lawyers for Trump. I'm assuming that y'all have never been Trump lawyers, Mr. Trustee or Mr. Costello.
No, I was for a year.
Oh, you were, and you still have your bar card?
I'm sorry?
You still have your bar card?
Yeah, well, unless I get targeted for daring to represent a former president.
You have absolutely done a lot better than most that deal with him, so good for you. I also want to make sure that we talk about what two-tier really looks like. And Mr. Trustee, since you've been a prosecutor before, I'm curious to know, have you ever had a criminal defendant that had over 80 counts in 4 different jurisdictions and somehow was not held pretrial? I know that you talked in your opening about your interpretation of what speedy trial looks like, and it's really only for those that are held pretrial. And last time I checked, most of the time those people held pretrial, they don't have anywhere near 80 counts pending against them. But I'm curious to know, in your experience, have you ever had someone that had over 80 counts pending in 4 different jurisdictions and they were not held pretrial? Yes or no?
Well, no specific recall,
Okay, all
but
right.
I could answer
That's
more
all
if you'll let me.
You told me no, and I understand because I hadn't either. So, in addition to that, There's been a gag order, since we're going to talk about the pending trial that's going on right now. Have you ever had a defendant that violated a gag order and then you went to the judge and the judge didn't lock them up and they done it at least 10 times? I think it's 10. I'm losing count right now. Have you ever had somebody violate?
In 35 years, I had never seen a defendant gagged.
Okay. Not my question. So you've never
Well, it's
had
hard
it.
to get to the second
you've
part if they're never
you've
gagged.
never had it. You're absolutely right. All right. So finally, when it comes down to intimidating witnesses, because maybe you haven't had gag orders, intimidating witnesses, have you ever had a defendant that you were prosecuting and they were intimidating witnesses and they didn't somehow end up in the clank for at least a day or two?
I've had criminal death penalty prosecutions based on witness retaliation. I'm very familiar with gang cases and mafia cases. Most of those defendants were already incarcerated when they would orchestrate some sort of obstruction.
Okay.
If there's provable physical violence-based obstruction, it certainly makes sense that they'd be incarcerated.
I don't know why or how anybody can support Project 2025. And I know that there was allegedly a joke about dictators and whether or not that's funny, but in the United States of America, dictatorships are never funny, and Project 2025 is giving the playbook for authoritarianism as well as the next dictator to come in. And I know that you are doing your jobs here by making sure that hopefully some juror turns on and finds some viral moment of you spewing more of the nonsense as it relates to the president. But as practicing lawyers or licensed attorneys, I hope that we can all agree that no one gets indicted because someone says so. There takes a grand jury, and the grand jury is comprised of American citizens that sit down and review evidence, and they make the determination. And when and if Trump is convicted, it will be a jury of his peers, and it won't be the President of the United States.
I thought you were going to get to a question somewhere in that 90 seconds for Mr. Hamilton after you went after his 2025. I will point out the Inspector General just released a report that said the FBI retaliated against whistleblowers. One of the reasons we do need some changes, but there was no question there. But Mr. Hamilton, if you want to give it some kind of response, you're more than welcome to do that.
Mr. Chairman, my only response would be to say that there are a great number of policy options that have been provided to any future conservative administration through Project 2025, and it's an attempt to restore the rule of law in this country. And I reject the Huffington Post-style characterizations of the recommendations.
All right. A gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from, we'll go to the gentlelady from Wyoming, then the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chair, I'd ask
Thank you.
unanimous consent.
Excuse me, this is, oh.
I'll get you as soon as we go after this thing. Just
Okay.
unanimous consent?
Yes, just unanimous consent to enter the mandate for leadership.
Without objection. Without objection. The
Thank-
gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Ms. Crockett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the point of deciding that we need to release this audio is really simple from my analysis. This is an opportunity for your party to take an opportunity to try to mock the current president. I know a lot of people refer to the former president as president, but we have one president at a time, and that is Joe Biden. And seemingly, this type of attitude and position has come straight from the top. This idea of lacking all decorum, decency, has left the building when the stench of Donald Trump showed up. And so we've seen constantly from him how he mocks people. We've seen in this committee how different members want to mock other members. And that's all this is about. But what is so frustrating to me and what should be frustrating to the American people, and the reason that really all y'all should lose y'all's jobs, but why we are going to take the majority is simple. It's because we showed up ready to work earlier today, like we always do. And now it is currently 10 p.m. and we are still here because we are committed to doing the right thing. And my question is really simple. It's a matter of, if this was such a big deal, if it was a matter of an emergency, if this was so important as it relates to whether or not the President of the United States has done something so wrong
then why is it that we couldn't have our hearing at 11 o'clock this morning instead of members being in a criminal courthouse with a twice impeached, over 88 count indicted sexual abuser, instead of being here to do the work of the American people if this was serious? This is the reason that people don't believe that we are doing serious
Mr. Chairman,
work
point of order.
here.
I'd ask the,
State your point.
my point of order is this. She just engaged in personalities about a former president, which
You can't engage in personalities with a former president. That is not the
reviewed the rules, and you know that is true. If you were on the floor, you would be admonished. You know that.
Not the rules.
Mr. Chairman, I'll further say, if this happened on
right,
the floor,
right.
you would be admonished by the
Your
parliamentarians.
point is correct.
No, you made in this circumstance, you made an announcement, I believe, that points of order about insulting presidents or former presidents are not in order in this hearing, because I take it you're going after Joe Biden, and so.
I gave it to him. Okay. All right.
I think you carved out an exception to that rule.
Okay, point of order overruled. Ms. Crockett, finish, please.
I'll yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you.
Would my friend yield to me?
Yes, I'll yield the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. You know, originally we have a motion, an ANS, to hold the Attorney General in contempt because he did not produce one item, an audio tape of the transcripts that were provided in full. And we decided, apparently, that that was what we were going to do because we're not sure about our chances in a court of law, which is really where this needs to be adjudicated. Now we have an amendment to the ANS taking cognizance of the development today in which the White House, not an unusual development and not always justified, invokes executive privilege. Now that is as old as the Republic. In fact, the first president to invoke executive privilege was George Washington, who did not want to provide documents regarding the Jay Treaty because it was controversial and might embarrass the White House. And we have had ups and downs with respect to executive privilege ever since. But the proper venue for adjudicating this is in a court of law. It isn't this committee. And so now this amendment to the amendment is essentially holding an attorney general in contempt because they're invoking executive privilege to protect information they choose not to provide the Congress. And I find that a very narrow basis, and I can understand why you don't want to have this adjudicated in a court of law, because I don't know that any judge would find that we have substantial reason to hold somebody in contempt for noncompliance. I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
You yield back.
I yield the remainder to the ranking member.
And I yield back to you, Ms. Crockett.
Then I yield.
Thank you.
You know, it's interesting because we've had so many conversations about telework and the evils of telework. And it seems to be this other false equivalency that if you telework, that means you're not working, instead of this idea that people are actually just working and they're not working in the building that is being paid for by the federal government. In fact, my mom is on telework, and my mom is absolutely one of the smartest people that I know. And so it always hits me a little differently every time we dump on those that are teleworking for the federal government. But interestingly enough, we're not allowed to telework here. We have to show up. There is no remote voting anymore. But even though we show up, are you aware of the fact that this has been the most unproductive Congress in the history of the Congress?
Congressman, I'll leave that judgment to
Okay,
members
well,
of
I'll
Congress
tell
and the
you, it
media.
is, and I've got some numbers for you. So to me, you can show up and still not do a daggone thing. And so it's rich that we have so many opinions to give you and to tell you how to do your job, but seemingly we're not doing ours. Thus far, only 1% of legislation that has been introduced has been passed in this Congress versus the last Congress where it was 6 points higher, and the Congress before that 6 points higher, and the Congress before that 7 points higher. There is no other Congress that has been least productive, and guess what? The last Congress, they could vote remotely, and somehow they figured out how to get it done. So I would just say that we need to be very mindful of when we decide to throw stones, because we may reside in a glass house. Thank you so much for your work. Mr. Chair, you know, I always come ready and then I get thrown off. So first of all, I thought that this was going to be somewhat bipartisan. I often tell our friends from Taiwan that the only thing that is bipartisan in this 118th Congress is China. But boy, you know, it never ceases to amaze me how we get so partisan and how we just start straight up lying. So let me make sure that we get the record correct really quickly. At this time, I'd like to enter into a record. An article from Reuters, Biden calls Xi a dictator after carefully planned summit. So let me go through a couple of other things that are disturbing. It was brought up a little bit earlier, this question about immigration, or there was some things about immigration. I know that you emphasized that we should look to legal immigration. And because I am off script right now, I'm curious to know if any of you are aware of what has happened in Japan and the difficulties that Japan has faced based upon the fact that they actually haven't wanted to engage in legal immigration, and it has detrimentally affected them economically. Is anyone familiar with that? Just curious.
Yes, no, it's absolutely true.
It's absolutely true. So I do want to say that it does hurt us when we decide to demonize people that are trying to come to this country. It hurts us economically. There also was this insinuation that people aren't working because they just, I guess, are lazy. I'm not really sure. But I do want to be clear that we have had record unemployment under this administration. In fact, we hit a 54-year record low under this administration. So people are working. Now, let me get to my actual planned remarks. I want to go back to something else that you brought up, which is my amazing ranking member and the investigation that we were trying to do as it relates to emoluments. So I'm going to start off first with you, Captain. I know you're no longer serving as an intelligence officer on China, but I have a simple yes or no question. Given your experience, would you trust someone to go head-to-head against an enemy like the Chinese government if that person, whose duties include ensuring national and international security against the PRC, if that person has received millions of dollars in other financial benefits from the Chinese government?
I don't know who you're talking about, so I'd have to wait and see who you're mentioning.
Okay. I don't know that I've... Okay, well, I'm going to say that I wouldn't trust that person. And it's the reason that I don't trust that Trump will protect this country. In fact, just this year, when asked whether the U.S. should defend Taiwan if it means going to war with China, Trump merely stated, well, I don't want to say, but remember, Taiwan did take all of our chips business. We used to make our own chips. Now they're made in Taiwan. Taiwan took our business away. It doesn't sound like he's too friendly on Taiwan. And I do want to say that while that may be the case, this administration and a democratically controlled House and Senate made sure that they did something smart on legislation. That legislation was led by my predecessor, the late, great Eddie Bernice Johnson, in the Science Committee. And the Chips and Science Act is absolutely making sure that we're moving those jobs back. I know Samsung is doing lots of great things in Ohio, and we know that these plants are sprouting up everywhere to make sure that we can make chips here. But what I continue to see is that Trump seems to only care about his money. Democrats on this committee publicly released financial documents detailing how Trump received over $5.5 million from the Chinese government. Not only that, these records also showed how President Trump and his White House senior advisor daughter, Ivanka, received hundreds of trademarks by the PRC during that time. So I'm going to skip to this timeline because I want to make sure we cover this. ZTE is a China telecommunications company which has had extremely close ties to the Chinese government, including reports showing ZTE employees entering and exiting Chinese spy facilities. Unfortunately, what we saw when we look at this timeline is that In May of 2018, China approved Ivanka's trademarks for bath mats, textiles, and baby blankets. May 7th, 2018, China approved 5 additional trademarks. May 13th, 2018, President Trump's tweets, he's instructed the Commerce Department to reverse its decision to sanction ZTE. June 7, 2018, Ivanka's company gets 3 more provisional Chinese trademark approvals the same day the Trump administration officially announces an agreement to lift the sanctions on a 7-year.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Sessions from Texas.
Now, moving on, I just want to level set because I feel as if some people don't understand how government works, and I don't know how they got to Congress. So, Mr. Wu, I'm gonna need you to help me out because I don't know that I trust that other people will know the answers to these questions. Number one, how many branches of government do we have?
3.
3, okay, sounds good. So, can you name them for me?
Legislative, judiciary, and executive.
Very good. Okay, so currently, I think that I serve in the legislative branch. Would you agree?
I agree.
Okay, fine. Can you tell me when somebody goes to court, such as a criminal convicted of 34 felony counts, state court in New York, would that be the legislative people or judicial people?
Well, it's really the executive that's prosecuting, and then it's within the judiciary to run the trial properly.
Okay, very good. So, judiciary. So, typically, if someone has an issue with, say, what happens in court, do they then somehow hop from state court all the way to the federal legislative branch, or is there a different process in which you are supposed to be able to explain any issues you may have?
The process would be the judicial appellate process, holding aside the issue of state versus federal.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. So normally people don't get convicted on a state level and somehow end up litigating the issue on the federal level in the legislative branch. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So something is different about what's going on today. I just wanted to clarify because I thought I was living in the upside down for a second. Now, I want to move on and talk about how someone is prosecuted. Currently, because under Project 2025, we'll get there, there will be a different way to prosecute people. But currently, it is my understanding, and I only kind of went to law school, passed a couple of bar exams, and practiced on the state and federal levels, but just clarify for me, when someone goes in to be prosecuted, is it, say, the President of the United States that somehow becomes the state prosecutor in New York?
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not, because he's the executor, huh? That's that other branch.
Correct.
That's the, okay. All right, so you have this prosecutor, and in this case, it's Alvin Bragg, who was duly elected, correct?
Correct.
Not appointed by the president, correct?
Right.
Duly elected by the citizens in his jurisdiction, right?
Right.
So he's elected, and usually there's some sort of an investigation that takes place, correct?
Prior to his election? Or?
No. With a case, I'm sorry.
Yes,
I've
correct.
moved on.
Yes.
All right. So the very first part of a case is that we go through an investigation. After that investigation, then the prosecutor usually has what we would consider to be some sort of prosecutorial discretion as to whether or not they want to go forward, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then they use that discretion, but then when it's somebody that is facing a felony amount of time, which is usually in most states over a year, then they have to present it to a grand jury. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, a grand jury is comprised of citizens, correct?
Correct.
U.S. citizens from that area, correct?
Right.
Okay, so they have to come to the conclusion that they are going to issue what we call a true bill, correct?
Correct.
All right, so then we have an indictment. And then there's pretrial motions, there's pretrial hearings, all kinds of stuff, right?
Right.
All right, and then ultimately, depending on where you are, you have the opportunity to say, hey, I want a jury trial, correct?
Correct.
And a jury trial is comprised of U.S. citizens again, right?
Right.
Okay, very good. All right, so can you tell me so far if all of this took place in the case in New York?
Yes, it did.
Oh, okay. All right, so you get to trial. Now, when you show up to trial and you're facing a felony amount of time, as a defendant, are you not entitled to an attorney?
Yes, you are.
And your attorney is allowed to pick the jury, they're allowed to present evidence, and ultimately, it is a jury of your peers who decides whether or not you are guilty or not, correct?
Correct.
And in this case,
the picking has the judge involved too.
And in this case, they found him guilty not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4, not 5, not 6. I could keep going on, but 34 counts were given. So the opinions of these people who were not juries is not what we do in this country. In this country, we have a system in which jurors decide who is found guilty, and if you have a problem with that, you go to the appellate court, which the last time I checked, he was raising money so that he could go to the appellate court and appeal his decision, and they will have the final say so. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And thank you so much, Mr. Administrator, for being here. First, I just have to again send love to Dr. Nance, who is my regional administrator. She and I love to go and give big checks in my district. So I appreciate her so very much. I also want to make sure that I level set, because I thought it was interesting that we were having an EPA hearing, considering the fact that some people in this chamber don't believe in this thing called climate change. So I just wanted to level set really quickly with you and find out from you if you believe that climate change is real or a hoax.
Climate change is very real.
Okay, thank you so much. I thought you may say that. And interestingly enough, you know, I'm sure that there are those in this country that are looking for those Nixon Republicans, those Republicans that simply just wanted to do the work of the people and weren't about sending out misinformation, disinformation, and continuously trying to undermine our federal government agencies that are trying to do everything that they can to protect the people. When we look at the Supreme Court in their recent ruling, again, they chose not to protect the American people. But hopefully we would get people in the legislature, and maybe we can get some legislation on the books to combat what the Supreme Court did so that we can get back to the business of protecting people. The reason that I bring Nixon up is because it was President Nixon, a Republican, who spearheaded the EPA's creation at a time where our country and communities were facing deteriorating air qualities in cities, where there was rampant pollution in our neighborhoods, and when urban water supplies were constantly being contaminated with dangerous toxins. I just would imagine that President Nixon would never stand for Project 2025, which wants to do the complete opposite of that. But I want to talk about a few other things, and then I will let you go. There's been all this talk about the money that you're getting, and all this talk about our debt. I just want to remind my colleagues that it is factual. It can be looked up. Under 4 years of the Trump administration, unlike any other administration in the history of this country, they somehow managed to rack up $8 trillion in debt in 4 years. But to be clear, in racking up that debt, it wasn't because they were trying to take care of agencies such as yours that are trying to protect people and make sure that they have clean air, clean water, clean soil. It was so that the rich 1%ers could have their tax cut. And again, Project 2025 is about making sure that those tax cuts that will expire in 2025, that they will get those back again. Again, they don't want to take care of the people, and it's okay to have debt in this country so long as the 1%ers get what they want. I just want to lay that out. Finally, when we look at where this money is going from this administration, Rep. Jordan's district got $500,000. The chair's district got about $1.6 million in EPA grants. Rep. Greene's district got $500,000. Rep. Luna's district got $300,000. And Rep. Perry's district got $1 million. So for Republicans that may feel a way about EPA and it allegedly pushing a woke agenda, I just want to know, can we get the money back? I'll yield. I want to stick here for just a second, because earlier you had a conversation in which there was a discussion about training. And I want to talk about training, and I want to talk about the fact that there's been a little bit of dancing around as it relates to this being a suspicious person and this being a situation that was perceived to be a threat. And it seems as if there's a different analysis that takes place. One of my questions has to do with if you have any bias training that your officers undergo. And the reason that I ask that, because as a civil rights lawyer, I have learned so many times in having to deal with law enforcement that there usually is not a perception of a threat when it is a young white male, even if they are carrying a long gun. Yet a lot of times, at least in this country, when it comes to law enforcement, there is a perceived threat just by somebody having a little bit more melanin in their skin. So I'm curious to know, because a lot of times, one of the things that we have consistently pushed for
on my side of things, and when I say my side is once we are looking at a tragedy in which law enforcement made an error, is the bias training and whether or not our officers are getting it. So I'm curious to know, in some of the training that you talk about that is part of your budget, has bias training been part of that?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. I know that today is a rough day, and on that day in Pennsylvania, it was a rough day. And the reality is that I understand it, and you may or may not know the answer to this question. In the space in which this event took place, it was an open carry space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So I hail from the state of Texas, and interestingly enough, I was serving in the state house right after there was a mass shooting in El Paso. We had an opportunity to do right by our citizens in Texas, but we did not. Instead, they passed permitless carry. And what my colleagues kept trying to get you to answer, because we want to come up with solutions, we don't want to keep pointing the finger. And right now, you've got a bunch of fingers that are pointed at you. But our job is to solve problems for the American people. And to be perfectly honest, the numbers are clear. I think almost every major law enforcement agency come forward and say that they were against permitless carry because they said that their jobs would be made more difficult. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the state of Texas decided that they would ignore those warnings, and they passed the law instead. And right after they passed that law, we ended up with Uvalde. And we heard the stories of those officers that were scared to go in and save those babies because of the firearm in which in that case, 18-year-old had in his hands. They also were given an opportunity to say, hey, raise the age and make it to where at least you have to be 21 before you can possess this type of weapon. And they chose not to. And we have the facts. It shows, and I'll enter this into the record as well if there is no objection, deaths from firearms keep climbing in Texas decades after lawmakers began weakening gun regulations. That is from the Texas Tribune.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. The last thing that I'm just going to make a point of saying is that we all care about this issue because we know that there has been a spike in violence, political violence in this country. Are you aware of the fact that the numbers are higher right now?
Yes.
Okay. In addition to that, and I'm going to point a little blame at ourselves because right now you got all the fingers pointed at you. But the reality is that we have a number of congressional members that are consistently engaging in violent rhetoric, and it needs to be toned down. The reality is that people are listening and they're paying attention, but unfortunately, another thing that is happening because we're not getting answers from you today is the conspiracy theories. They have already began. Have you heard of any of the conspiracies?
Yes.
Okay. The problem with these conspiracies is that when people believe that, say, the President of the United States ordered a hit, or they believe it was an inside job, or whatever conspiracies they believe because they don't have any facts in front of them, that potentially incites the next level of violence at the next event in retaliation for this. So we are only begging for your job as it relates to being the director, as well as the men and women that you are protecting as their director, that you keep them safe by making sure that the American people have the information that they need so that they can feel as if Secret Service is on the side of the American people. And ma'am, I don't doubt that Secret Service is on the side of the American people. But right now, so long as these conspiracy theories continue to fester, it is going to make your job that much harder. Thank you so much, and I yield.
Thank you so much. You know what, this hearing is actually the best example of what waste, fraud, and abuse looks like, because the only reason we're having this hearing is because somebody got their feelings hurt in a debate, and I don't understand why we're wasting taxpayer dollars. Next time, tell your big boy to show up and be ready to handle the woman in the room who hopefully will become the next president of the United States. Nevertheless, while we do have two amazing authors from Project 2025, which it seems like everybody got the memo, like, yes, I'm going to double down and say it's my thing, but I'm going to make sure I also say that it ain't our homeboys thing, because we know that it doesn't poll very well with the American people, because the American people are woke enough to recognize that there is nothing good in it for them. I also want to talk about inflation really quickly with you, Ms. Perryman, because we've talked about it a lot. I'm just curious to know, is the inflation that we just struggled through, was that global or was that limited to the United States?
Global.
Global.
seemingly it was attached to this thing called the global pandemic. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't just the United States.
No.
Okay, so it wasn't just a matter of the Biden-Harris administration and the United States is struggling, right?
I think the United States actually fared better than the rest of the world.
Oh, yeah. In fact, we are, correct?
I think so, yeah.
All right, but inflation still hurts, and so that's why we have a candidate that has an actual plan instead of concepts of a plan. Or as I like to say, Trump only has offered concepts of constitutionality mixed with coordinations of a coup. But nevertheless, we're gonna move on. I wanna talk about the internet really quickly because we wanted to talk about the internet. Actually, let me talk about the border real fast and then we can talk about Texas in this way. I'd ask for unanimous consent to admit this article from The Hill that says Trump says, blame it on me if border bill fails.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. Now I'm gonna move on to the internet. And I'm actually gonna talk about Texas because I believe that the testimony has been somewhere around the fact that no money has actually been disputed as it relates to rural broadband. I'd also ask for unanimous consent to admit this article from the USDA.gov. USDA officials attend groundbreaking to expand high-speed internet access in rural Texas, dated March 7th, 2024, Italy, Texas.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much.
With respect, that was not the testimony.
Oh, I thought you said no dollars had been spent.
The largest single program.
My question is, did you not say?
$42 billion.
Okay.
0 houses have been connected. There are other federal programs, including Trump-era ones, that right now are turning dirt and connecting.
Okay, so just to be clear, because I don't want the American people to be confused, because I was confused, because it almost seemed as if, considering the fact the name of this hearing is the failed policies, as if nothing had been done. But to clarify for those that are watching, you aren't saying that no dollars have been spent as it relates to rural broadband dollars under the Infrastructure Act, correct?
To be clear, for the signature effort, $42
Yes
billion,
or no? Have any dollars been spent?
not a
$1.
single person has been connected. There's
That's
other
not my
programs,
question though. My
but they
question
have
was,
their own
have
sets
any?
of issues. Senator Ted Cruz from
Okay,
Texas
I'm
put out
gonna
a
move on.
report
I'm gonna
to
move
show
on.
that
I'm reclaiming my time at this point.
many of these
I'm
bills, it's
reclaiming my time, which means, Chairman, I'm gonna
$100,000
ask
per
you to
location.
stop my time because the witness is not.
Are you asking him a question, or are you?
No, I'm
reclaiming
not
your time?
asking him a question. I reclaim my time.
All right. The chair recognizes Ms. Crockett.
Okay, now I was at 41, y'all, so go back up.
We'll give
I
you
was
9
watching.
more seconds.
Okay, thank you so much. Here's the deal. You've testified a lot about the problem with the broadband rollout being diversity, equity, and inclusion. You said DEI, I don't know how many times, which is one of the issues that Project 2025 takes issue with. But it's interesting to me because I have another article from the Texas Tribune, and it actually specifically states that internet providers say they are simultaneously hopeful and skeptical about whether the incoming federal dollars will be enough to connect the most underserved Texans. Historically, other federal rural broadband funding programs have seen limited success because many companies who committed to providing broadband went into default after radically underestimating their cost. It doesn't say anything about diversity. And the final thing that I will say
Do you
is
know why
that
those
this
costs have
election,
increased
I didn't ask you a
substantially?
question. The final thing that I will say is that this election is the best example of why y'all are so afraid of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because then you can't have a simple-minded, underqualified white man somehow end up ascending. Instead, you've got to pay attention to the qualified black woman that is on the other side. And with that, I will yield.